They made him step aside in a five-star lobby because his skin didn't match the marble floors or the tailored suits that usually passed without question. No raised voice, no disturbance, just a quiet black man with calm eyes and a reservation they refused to honor. He was told to wait, ignored, mocked, filmed behind his back, and eventually escorted out like a trespasser. What no one realized was that the man they tried to humiliate was the very force keeping their world standing. This is not just a story about racism. It's about power, silence, and what happens when the wrong person is underestimated. The lobby of the Langston Grand shimmered under late afternoon light, glass chandeliers casting reflections across polished marble as classical music hummed faintly in the background. Business travelers and affluent tourists moved like clockwork through the pristine space, stopping briefly at the front desk, where smiling clerks welcomed them with charm and deference. Among them walked a man who did not fit the expected mold. Elijah Carrington entered in silence, wearing a plain charcoal coat and well-worn jeans, carrying a single leather briefcase. His posture was relaxed, his pace unhurried, his eyes focused. No one greeted him. No bellhop approached. He walked to the front desk, where a young white clerk named Tyler Bennett looked up with an expression that shifted quickly from neutral to wary. Tyler's eyes scanned Elijah slowly, pausing a fraction too long on his clothes and complexion. He asked for a reservation number without a greeting, without a smile. Elijah responded calmly and handed over his confirmation code and ID. Everything was in perfect order. Tyler looked at the screen, then back at Elijah, then at the screen again, as if something didn't make sense. The booking was real. The suite was available. But still, Tyler hesitated. He tapped the keyboard unnecessarily long, then announced that due to a new security policy, all guests were now required to place a $3,000 cash deposit upon check-in. He pushed a form across the desk and motioned toward the payment terminal. Elijah glanced at the form. It was unusual. Moments earlier, a white couple had been checked in without delay. No deposit. No policy update. No paperwork. Elijah's voice remained steady as he asked if this requirement applied to every guest or just him. Tyler's face did not change. He repeated the demand and leaned back, arms crossed, waiting. There was a long pause, not in hesitation, but in calculation. Elijah didn't argue. He looked around the lobby, observing the differences in how others were treated. Another clerk nearby called out that the suite was cleaned and ready. Tyler ignored it. Instead, he feigned confusion, said the system was acting strangely, and suddenly suggested that Elijah might find better luck at another hotel down the street. The implication was clear. It wasn't about availability. It was about appearance. The kind of appearance that made people like Tyler uncomfortable in places like the Langston Grand. Elijah stood his ground without raising his voice. Other guests came and went. A bellhop passed by, caught a glance of Elijah, and froze for a second too long. Recognition flickered in his eyes, but he kept walking. Tyler didn't notice. He was too focused on controlling the moment, ensuring this man would leave without a key card or a presence in their system. That control, however, was slipping. Elijah asked to speak with the manager. Tyler said no one was available, then printed a fake error receipt to back his claim. Elijah said nothing more. He simply stepped aside and sat in one of the plush lobby chairs. And from there, he watched the room, watched the ones who passed by, watched how the staff bent over backward for others. His presence was calm, but unignorably a quiet reminder that dignity does not depend on designer suits. Tyler returned to his desk, smiling at the next guest as though the previous interaction had never occurred. Elijah checked his phone, looked at the time, and waited. He had no intention of leaving. The hotel had not denied his reservation. They had only denied his right to be treated equally. Tyler gestured suddenly, framing Elijah's stillness as suspicious. The guard glanced toward the seated figure and then back at Tyler, confused at first, but followed protocol anyway. He walked over to Elijah, lowered his voice, and asked if there was a problem. Elijah looked up slowly, unbothered, and responded in measured tones that he was simply waiting for assistance. Tyler, standing behind the desk with folded arms, nodded toward the guard and whispered something that couldn't be heard. But his expression made his opinion clear. The narrative had already been framed. Elijah was no longer just an inconvenient guest. He was now a perceived problem that needed to be handled publicly. The guard asked him to either check in properly or vacate the lobby. The statement made little sense given the context, but the tone implied that force could follow. A few nearby guests turned their heads. They didn't hear the full exchange, but the sight of a security guard confronting a seated black man was enough to shape their assumptions. Elijah didn't argue. He calmly reiterated that he had a valid reservation, that he was given no room, and that he was simply waiting. The bellhop from earlier hovered nearby, clearly uncomfortable, but still silent. And then Vanessa appeared. The assistant manager wore a tailored blazer, a silver name tag, and the expression of someone who'd already chosen a side. She approached with purposeful steps, her heels echoing against the marble, and greeted the guard, but ignored Elijah entirely. Tyler quickly updated her in hushed tones, exaggerating Elijah's behavior, painting him as confrontational and evasive. Vanessa didn't question it. She turned to Elijah, looked him over as if she were evaluating whether he belonged in the building at all, and then folded her arms tightly across her chest. Her tone was professional but clipped and cold, the kind that welcomed regulars and froze out outliers. She stated that hotel policy required cooperation, and if a guest refused to comply with their front desk team, the hotel reserved the right to refuse service. Elijah remained seated, his expression unreadable, his hands calmly folded in his lap. He asked again if there was a manager available higher than her. Vanessa raised her chin and replied that she was the highest authority on site and that no one else needed to be involved in a simple matter of compliance. Another guest walked by, glancing at the scene, raising an eyebrow at the presence of security, but not stopping. A sense of unease began to ripple through the staff, though it was unspoken. Tyler leaned against the counter, victorious in posture, already believing the man would be gone within minutes. He smirked and said, loudly enough for nearby ears, "Some people just don't understand when they're out of place." Elijah finally stood, not in reaction, not in defiance, but because he had allowed enough rope to be laid. He straightened his coat, looked toward Vanessa, and said he would remain in the lobby until someone capable of actual decision-making arrived. Vanessa's cheeks flushed with annoyance. She nodded to the guard again, signaling for him to escort Elijah out if necessary. But the guard hesitated. Something about Elijah's presence, his poise, made it feel wrong. Tyler noticed the hesitation and stepped in, instructing more firmly this time. The crowd in the lobby grew thicker. Though most were focused on their own affairs, some began to notice the tension and imbalance in posture. Elijah turned slightly, enough for the room to see he wasn't ashamed, wasn't afraid, and wasn't leaving. He moved back to his chair slowly and deliberately, as if reclaiming space others assumed he had no right to. Vanessa stood frozen for a moment, her authority questioned, not with resistance, but with elegance. Tyler glanced at her, waiting for direction, but she said nothing. The silence was louder than any command.